Greetings! I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build this Meng FT-17. This video has been sponsored by Metro Hobbies, who were generous enough to send me this kit for the purposes of making this video and the build streams and such. If you like what you see here, and want to purchase your own FT-17, there's a link you can use in the description below. There's also a more general link you can use to peruse all of the things Metro Hobbies have on offer. Check them out. I give them a hearty thumbs up. This is actually the first Meng kit that I've built. I've heard a lot of good things about them, so I'm excited to give this kit a try. I've already done a what's in the box video, so it would be a bit redundant for me to do that again here, so if you want to have a look at the sprues and other stuff included in the kit, there's a link in the description you can use to watch that video. This is going to be a long video, so let's get right into the gluing together of the bits of plastic. We start with the whole bottom here. Onto that we install this here rod thing, which has something to do with the steering levers. At the front here, this set of foot pedals. I'm pretty glad these are all a single part. It makes things a lot easier than if they were all individual pieces. Over the top of all of that, and hiding a lot of the floor detail, we place this floor. A floor on a floor? Floor is probably the wrong term here. You do have to be a little careful in placing this to make sure you get the pedals into their slots, but it's not especially tricky. When I've got the floor in place, I pull the pedals back just a bit so they don't look like some invisible ghost type of entity is pushing them down. Next comes this doodad, which is the gear lever holder mount. Call it what you like. We'll be sticking a gear shifter here later. A backrest, for which the driver will be very thankful, goes on next. Doesn't look all that comfortable, but I guess it's better than nothing. Either way, it's very easy to install. In front of that, into the mounting holes, we attach a nice comfortable cushion for the driver to sit on. The steering levers come next, and they join onto the little rod things we mounted under the floor. The levers are identical, and the keying on the mounting rod is different on each end, so either part could go on either side. It is a little bit fiddly to get these in, but it's not too bad. And now we can steer. Hooray! Next, so the driver can change gears, I install this gear shifter. This goes into the gear thingy that I installed earlier. You might need to nudge it a bit so that it's straight, but this is far from the fiddliest thing in this kit. Time to work on the whole sides. On this one, I add this little set of gauges. There isn't anything to guide the positioning of this, so I eyeballed it relative to the other bits of detailing here. I'm not sure that it's in the exact right position, but close enough.
But it's not precisely in position!
I said, close enough. I followed that by making a box. This is just as simple to put together as it looks, just make sure that you're putting the lid around the right way. Onto that I glue these mounting brackets. These are keyed, but there's a fair bit of play to them. I try to line them up as straight as I can relative to the box. Then, why not add that to the hull? This is easy, though I think it might be a good idea to add these external details after putting the hull together to reduce the risk of damaging said details. That of course is not what I did. Fortunately I didn't damage anything. The next thing I added was this pair of brackets. I'm not sure what they're for, maybe you could hang some chains or ropes off of them or something. Next, shackles. These are easily installed and have a fancy little loop on the end of the pin, and that should be on the top of the part so don't mount them upside down, or else. Toward the front of the hull there's a little nubbin. That's a guide for whatever this thing is. I'm assuming this is a little step to make it easier for the driver to enter the tank. Suspension time. This is a little bit fiddly, and it does involve some non-plastic parts, so get your super glue ready I guess. What you do is place this spring on the end of the shaft, then this end part can be glued into place like so. I then insert that spring assembly into the retaining bracket, I guess you might call it. The spring needed a bit of nudging to sit properly, and I don't glue this into place because it should be movable. That assembly can then be glued onto the hull. This is pretty easy. I do kind of like that this kit has working suspension, at least to some degree. The spring is pretty stiff and hard to compress, so it might as well not be workable, and it would be a bit easier if this was just a plastic part, but it is a cool idea. Time to work on the tank's right-hand side. First, I glue this fire extinguisher into place. I'm pretty sure that's what this is. Then comes a thing whose function I'm completely unaware of. Whatever it is, it goes here. And now for the external components on this side. This muffler, which is comprised of 3 parts, goes together pretty easily. You might need to do some nudging and pressure applying, but that's not really a challenge. And then why not install that on the side of the hull? There are some nice convenient mounting holes for it, and it goes into place nice and easy. As you can see, I've already installed the springy thing on this side. Next, I install the brackets that will hold the shovel and pick. This is a bit tricky if you're going to do it properly, with the photo etch retaining straps, and I haven't. I install the lower part of the bracket and then the tools, and it's not especially difficult doing it this way. However, it seems like you are supposed to join the 2 halves of each bracket with the retaining straps, and then mount that over the top of the tools. Seems tricky, and I didn't quite comprehend the instructions at first. I installed the brackets, and then I considered how I was going to attach the photo etch straps, which need bending. I did start doing this, but it seemed like a huge pain, so I just omitted them.
You're the worst, Herbert.
Delicious sausage.
That's not what I meant.
Next, I add the little footstep thing and shackles. Both of these parts go on exactly the same way as the ones on the left side did, which is to say easily. Now that we have 2 good-looking FT-17 hull sides, why not attach them to the hull bottom? This is a little bit tricky. The edges where the parts join are angled and the shape of the parts should act as a kind of guide, but I definitely wouldn't call it keying, so you do have to eyeball this a bit to get a good fit. The way I did it was to glue each side on in segments. That way it's a bit easier to hold and apply pressure and make sure everything fits together nicely. Once I got the right hull side on, I add this. I don't know what it is, some kind of control. This joins between the wall and floor, so I figured it would be a bit tricky to install this on the wall without knowing exactly how it should sit, so I left it until now so I would know exactly how it goes in. I then add the left side of the hull. All the things I said about the other side apply here too. The front armor plate goes on next, and this is simple enough, though there isn't any keying here, so you've got to eyeball it a bit. I try to minimize the gaps, but it's not perfect. Let's blame it on riveted construction. Yeah, why not? The rear plate, if that's what you would call this, goes on the rear.
Really, Herbert? It goes on the rear?
Yes. It goes on much like that front plate that we just installed, except on the rear. A little nudging and holding was needed to get it lined up properly, but it wasn't hard to do. Then, I install another one of those control rod handle thingies like on the other side. This one was a little bit more fiddly to get into place, and not just because the opposite wall was on, there was also some more stuff to try and work it past. I got it on though, and that's what matters. Why not install another front plate? It needs to be here, so I might as well put it on. This is a lot like the lower plate. A little bit of nudging was needed, and it's not perfect, but it does go on easy enough. I stop working on the hull at this point to make it a bit easier to paint the interior, but before I can do that, I need to build the turret. I start by gluing the 2 halves of the gun breech part together, and there's keying here to help with this. Then I sandwich this platey thing that will help hold the gun inside the turret between the breech assembly and the end of the gun that goes on the outside of the turret, the business end. This, I think it's the sight, I'm not sure, goes on here like so. The little tab thingy here should hold this part the correct distance away from the side of the gun. On the other side I attach whatever this thing is, maybe it's the breech block, I don't know, I'm not a gunsman. This is a tiny part and it was a little bit tricky to place, but I got it on there. The gun is a little bit fiddly to do, but definitely not the most complicated gun I've put together. I obviously haven't done so, but if you want, you do get the option of a machine gun as your main armament. I thought this gun was a bit more interesting though. So that we can get it into the turret, we need to add this bit. I don't know what you might call this, a mantlet or something else, but it goes between the gun and the turret, so it's probably kind of important. Now, why not join the gun and turret front together? First, I add one of the mounting doodads, and it's probably best to leave this to bond for a moment. Then I place the other doodad on the gun and kajigger it into place. When it's there, I glue it all together. You can leave it so the gun can be moved, but I've chosen to glue it so that it won't move. If you glue it into place like I have, it's a good idea to consider how you want it to be elevated and such. That's a good gun. Now we just need a turret to mount it in, and I guess I'll do that now. The bottom of the turret is symmetrical, so it doesn't matter where you start placing the turret side parts. I started with one of the hatch openings, because to me it made sense to start there. It doesn't really matter where you start though. I place the turret sides, working my way around the ring, which is not especially difficult. Just make sure that you're using the correct parts in the correct places. You may need to do a bit of nudging and applying pressure and such to make sure everything lines up nicely, but it's not especially hard. I test fit with the roof part to make sure that everything will go together nicely, but I don't glue it into place just yet. It will be much easier to paint the inside of the turret without the roof. I glue the front wall and gun assembly into place next, and this fit really well. It pretty much just dropped right into place. To make sure that it stays there, and the glue god smiles upon us, I add plenty of glue. Onto the roof part, I add the Coppola. I mean, where else are we going to put the Coppola? This consists of 3 parts. This bottom part is keyed, so you can't put it on wrong without some difficulty, and sometimes the difficulty means that you are doing it wrong. On top of that goes this middle Coppola section, which doesn't quite have the keying of the lower part, but it does have a particular way that it should face, with those little nubbins to the rear. This did need quite a bit of pressure to minimize the gaps. Then, the dome part. This, obviously, goes up on top. You can't really see them here, but there were some nubs inside this that correspond with the nubs on the lower part, and that should guide where this part goes. They are quite small nubs and won't lock the parts into place, but they are there, and that's the roof done. Very roof. There's a photo etch strapped for the gunner to sit on, and I neglected to video myself bending this, but I did bend it. You can probably tell because it's not straight. The bending was a little bit fiddly, and it took a bit of time, but if you're careful and do enough test fitting and take your time with it, it's not too bad. Not having any precise and straight bends, well, except for the ends, does make this a little bit easier than the average photo etch bending. You can see on the inside of the turret there are some little hooks for the strap to hook into, which is quite convenient. It means the part will stay in place without any glue. I did use glue because I didn't want it to fall out with the slightest bump, but it will stay there while the glue bonds, which is really nice. At this point I painted the interior parts of the model, but we'll see how I did that in the painting video, which will be quite a while off, so don't hold your breath. For now, I resume working on the hull. This little doodad has to be put together. I don't know what it is, but it's made up of 4 rather small parts, and 1 slightly less small part. It was a bit fiddly to put together, but I did get there. Once it's done, I set it aside to bond while I glue this angled bit to the forward edge of the engine deck top. Is engine deck the correct term for a tiny tank like this? Who knows? Next, I attach this thing, which was not the correct thing to do. It does actually go here, just not yet, but before I realised that, I glued on the little square doodad that I put together just before, which was easy enough. Then, I learned the error of my ways. I tried to install this hammer, and wouldn't you know, it's meant to go under the rectangular thing that I mistakenly installed before. Fortunately, the glue wasn't totally bonded, and I was able to pull it up and get the hammer into place. I would hate to have this tank go without its hammer. Everybody needs a hammer. Onto that assembly, I joined I guess you would call it the turret ring part, because that is largely what this is. There's a little guide tab here which should make things easy. I try to join these parts together such that they'll sit nice and flat atop the hull. And now, it's time for some photo etch. This little grill for the engine deck. This is a really nice, fine piece of metal, and because it's metal, superglue is going to be used. It almost dropped right into place. I only had to nudge it a tiny bit, but do be careful when nudging this. I can imagine it would bend and deform quite easily. It is very thin. It does look really good though. Then, onto the front of our hull top assembly, I glue this plate. This has the hinge for the upper segment of the driver's hatch, so it's probably best not to forget it. I wasn't super confident I was getting this on at the right angle, but I think it's probably close enough. Next, I put together this bit that will go in the center of the engine deck, above the 2 hatches. This is keyed and goes together easily enough. Before I install that assembly, I want to make sure everything will fit together good and proper, so I install the very rear top plate part. This goes into place pretty easily, and I think adding this now should allow me to use it as a guide for the positioning of the rest of the parts. You can see here that I'm using the engine doors to determine the placement of the roof turret ring assembly part. There isn't any keying for this that I could find, so this is how I figured out the positioning. I glue the roof part into place, and I did this slowly and in sections. It involved a fair bit of sitting and holding the parts in place to allow the glue to start bonding, but it wasn't especially difficult. Then I add the engine hatches. The only thing you could really consider keying here is the hinge parts, and really you don't need much else. I did need to do a bit of nudging and fiddling, but it's not too difficult to get these into place. Next, this thing I just put together goes into place here. This is also guided by its hinge parts. To make sure that stays closed while we're bouncing around the battlefield, because this thing is so fast that it bounces on the battlefield apparently, this little latch doodad goes into place here. It's a tiny piece, so it's fiddly for that reason, but not too difficult to get into place. Moving towards the front, I add these plates to enclose the driver's compartment a little bit. These were quite fiddly to get into place, and I kind of wish I had added these before painting the inside of the hull, but I feel like I needed the roof part to get these lined up properly, and having the roof part on would have made it too hard to paint the inside. I guess there's always a compromise we've got to make. Next, just so the turret will be almost completed, I glue the roof into place. It fits nice and easy, and it looks pretty good with that paint in there, in my opinion. Now, let's give this thing some mobility. I start by assembling the little bogies that hold the wheels. There are two of these, sub-bogies, I guess you might call them, and they're held together by this bogie-holding beam thing. This first bogie has a set of 3 wheels and a set of 2. The second bogie has 2 sets of 2 wheels. They go together pretty easily, in theory. You just sandwich the wheels between the 2 outer parts, obviously making sure that you're using the correct parts. I attempted to put the wrong parts together and it resulted in an obviously incorrect fit, so probably don't do that. I did say this was easy in theory. In reality, it's really a bit fiddly owing to the small size of the wheels, but it's not the hardest thing to do. You can see the parts are quite similar for both bogies, and the assembly is pretty much the same too. This was a bit time consuming, but eventually it was done. And then, it's a really good time for more wheels. It's always a really good time for wheels, isn't it? There are 5 smaller wheels that get sandwiched between these 2 bars. This will form the upper, I guess, return roller section of the tracks. There is actually a 6th wheel here, but it gets installed a bit differently. You take the small metal bar, put this spring-holding doodad on the end of the return roller thing, slide the metal bar in, and then put the 6th return roller in and slide the bar all the way through. This does make for some nice workable parts, though it does seem a little bit redundant because not all of the suspension is workable. Still, it's a pretty cool idea. You could superglue this into place to make sure that it won't come out, but I didn't. I guess I like to live life on the edge. Continuing with the suspension assembly, I glue these 2 parts together to form this brackety thing. This is what the return roller set will rest on. Once it's together, it goes onto this part. The little flat bit with the circular recess in the top should face towards the sort of forked end of this thing. That's the front. Next, this thing. Whatever it is, it goes here, guided into the correct position by the keying. On the underside, these leaf springs go into some mountings. You'd be forgiven for thinking these 2 parts were the same, but they are a little bit different. One of them has 2 little knobs sticking out of the sides, and that one goes towards the front. But first, this little thing needs to be glued onto it. Initially, I found this a bit confusing. The little doodad on the end is not meant to contact the platey part that the other end of the leaf spring is glued onto. We'll see how that's meant to work in a moment. For now, it's time to glue the bogies into the frame. You can see what I mean when I say that the suspension isn't fully workable. There's no way to get the bogies in between the frame and have them be movable, without also very easily falling out of place. I'm not really bothered by that, but having some parts workable does increase the complexity of the model for no real gain. Once you get the bogies with the road wheels sandwiched between the 2 halves of the frame, I take the drive sprocket and what looks to be some sort of very thin final drive housing. I don't know what it is obviously, but it goes here in this part of the frame alongside the drive sprocket. It's held in place with this axle-y thing. I don't glue this into place just yet because you want both of these parts to be movable to allow fitting to the hull and for when it comes time to install the tracks. Next, I glue the platey part with the leaf springs and such into place. There's some bits of keying to get it into place, though you may need to do some nudging and definitely apply some pressure. And here's where that doodad on the end of the leaf spring goes. It's meant to sit in the 2 recesses toward the rear of the frame. You can see why I was a bit confused here. Not that it's really hard to do, it's just that the instructions weren't especially clear. Either way, I got it together, and on top of that, I glue this thing, which will hold one end of the return roller assembly. There is keying for this, but there's also a little bit of play in it, so try to line it up as straight and neatly as you can. Next, the big idler wheel for the front of the tank, which I think is one of the iconic parts of the vehicle, clips into this holder thing. The wheel will stay there with friction alone, though you could glue it into place if you wanted. Of course, I did that a bit later on, but for now, it's fun to let it spin. That wheel assembly then slides into place here, and you can see there's a circular socket for it. I do my best to make sure that it's lined up nice and straight. Nobody wants a wonky wheel.
I do.
No, you don't. Next, I clip the return roller thing into place. This does stay here with friction, though it's not a very tight fit and can easily be knocked out of place. I didn't glue it in yet, but eventually I will. To make the return roller nice and springy, I add a spring here in the little recess. Because the spring is metal, I'm using super glue. This isn't very tricky at all, just don't let the spring bounce away. You can see how it's meant to interact with the movable doodad on the return roller thing here. In the background, you can see I've already done the tracks. Don't worry about that just yet. At this point, I'm attaching the suspension assemblies to the hull, and this is fairly easy. The rear has 2 pins that mount into the corresponding holes, and this is why I left the axle bit here unglued. You need to be able to move that in apart to make the assembly fit. Then it connects to the front here like so. There aren't a whole lot of contact points to glue here, so it is going to be a bit delicate, but it does go together just fine. You can also see that I've removed the return roller part because they were getting in the way. It's easy enough to put that back on when needed. Let's take a look at the tracks now. These are individual links, obviously, and I know a lot of people aren't into that kind of thing, but these are pretty good, and they simply clip together. It's not a super tight fit, so they do come apart fairly easily, but if you think that'll be a problem, you could just glue them together when you've got them where you want them. Simple enough. The FT-17 has 32 links per side, and once they're together they go onto the tank relatively easily, though they don't really seem to want to stay on nice and neatly, and that's probably something we'll have to use glue to deal with later on, maybe after painting. The tracks are good, but I did have a problem with them. Quite a few of the links were damaged. There were quite a few more links included than the tank actually needs, which is great, and I wish more kits did that. However, all of the extra ones were damaged such that they wouldn't link together, and to be used at all they would have to be glued together. It was kind of annoying, though I am glad that there were enough usable parts to get the full runs of 32 links per side. You'll see as the video progresses that I took them back off the model pretty quickly. They were getting in the way a bit. They can stay off until painted. The next thing I did was to add the driver's hatches. These have handles, otherwise the driver would have a hard time using them, and the handles are small and a little bit fiddly, but not too hard to get into place. It would have been a waste of time to paint the interior if I modelled these hatches closed, so open they shall be. The only contact point here is the hinge, so it's not the most sturdy, but it does work. I think I've got these open at close to the correct angle, but I'm not totally sure. The upper section of the hatch comes next, and to make sure that it won't interfere with the gun, I've put the turret in place to test fit. I glue the hatch part into place, and again, I'm not totally sure this is the correct angle, but it's on, and that's better than it not being on, I guess. Now, I turn my attention to the tank's butt, where I glue on this square piece of photo etch. I'm not sure what this is, but it's not difficult to get into place, and obviously I'm using super glue here. Another piece of photo etch goes here, on the forward edge along the bottom of the wheel frame, or whatever you might like to call that thing. This is another simple, flat piece of photo etch that isn't especially difficult to attach. Next, because for some reason the French didn't want their tanks to flip over backwards when doing wheelies, we need to make a framey thing for the rear of the tank.
That's an unditching tail, you fool!
Whatever. There are 2 framey parts that are glued onto this curved plate. Make sure these go into place evenly with each other. I had to readjust mine so they would sit on the tank at a sensible angle, which is straight, not sticking out to the side. Then I glue this cross-bracing thing into place. I think it would probably be a better idea to add this after the photo etch, but I didn't do that. So I had to do a bunch of fiddling to get these photo etch braces into place, which was a bit annoying. These parts could easily have been plastic. Then we hide all of that work with this tarp. It is a nice looking part. You can see the indentation from the cross bracing beneath it, which is a subtle but I think very nice detail. the anti-wheelie thing.
Unditching tail!
Nya. Whatever you want to call it, it goes into place next. There's a couple of fairly obvious mounting points for it, and it's easy enough to put on. If you've put the tail together properly, it should sit nice and straight. There's a little pin here with a curved end, which I would imagine is to lock the tail into place, and it's easy enough to put this on too. Not quite so easy were these little hooks. It's kind of tricky to get them into the little mounting notches under the tarp. I did get them into what looks to be close to the right position though. I had a bit more trouble with the second one than the first, and I think if I hadn't already got the first one into place, I might have just omitted them. They are on though, so that's nice. Hatches for the turret seem like a nifty idea, so let's do that. One of these has a little piece of photo etch, and this did need a slight bend, but that's pretty simple to do. It goes into place quite easily, and there's a small recess for it to mount into. There's also handles. These are just as easy as the handles on the driver's hatches, and once that's done, why not add them to the turret? Like the driver's hatches, the only contact point is the hinges, so I'd imagine these might not be the strongest, but they're on and they seem to be staying there. And that's the tank built. It's obviously trackless, and it's not the only thing in the kit, so why not quickly whip together this machine gun? This is kind of a little bonus inclusion with the kit. It is the same machine gun that you would install into the turret if you wanted to arm the tank that way, but if you don't use it there, you can attach it to this stand. I wouldn't call it a selling point of the kit, but it is a cool little extra. The tripod and gun go together pretty easily, and about the only fiddly thing here was attaching the ammunition belt. I understand that these are kind of bars of ammo, and not a belt, so they should be straight. I rested this on a sideways sanding stick that was just the right height while it bonded, rather than having to hold it by hand and hoping it wouldn't be wonky. The other thing that comes with this kit, which if you've looked at the box or seen the What's in the Box video, is not a surprise, but it's the Scenic display base. This is pretty simple to put together, and since the video is already quite long, I'll try to make it quick. There's a T-shaped thing in the middle onto which the side parts connect, and everything is keyed quite nicely here, though I did have to do a little bit of fiddling to get everything lined up nice and neatly. Once the sides are together, I add the detaily ground bits. Again, there is keying, but some fiddling and nudging was needed to get both of these parts into place. The fit isn't perfect, and depending on how much the sides of this matter to you, you might need to do some filling and sanding. There's a sort of frame thing that goes around the bottom of this display, and this is also keyed and not too hard to get into place. Fiddling was needed to make it line up nice and neatly, and again you may need to do some filling and sanding. When that's all together, it's a simple matter of adding all of the extra detail-y bits, like the broken planks. These all have specific places they should go, so refer to the instructions for that. They're all easy to place, and in my opinion, the wood grain looks rather good. Initially I was worried about the big gap along the top of the diorama base, but that's because I wasn't thinking ahead. The gap is pretty much entirely dealt with by placing the sandbags. Like the planks, these have specific places they should be attached, and the instructions will tell you which one goes where. After a short while, we've got ourselves a nice display base for the FT-17. Of course, you don't have to use it, or even build it, but I do think it's really cool. Okay, so that's the Meng FT-17 in 1/35th scale, on its little diorama base, completed. I think it looks excellent. Obviously it's a bit messy looking where there's overspray of primer and paint on the outside of the model, and it is going to look much better once it's completely painted. Don't hold your breath for that, by the way, it is going to be a while. But it still looks pretty good in the bare plastic. I find early tanks like this really interesting. I would hate to go into battle in one of these things, and the people who did so were quite brave indeed, but it's really interesting to look at them and see how tanks and technology have developed. I've been on a bit of a World War I thing lately, and at the time of recording, I've been working on the TACOM Saint-Chamond on my streams, and I do have a few other World War I things coming as well. I guess that's not really relevant to this kit, is it? This is my first Meng kit, and I'm really pleased with it. It wasn't the easiest thing I've built, but that's not because it's a bad kit. It's just a relatively fiddly and slightly complex kit, but not overly so. There's obviously a difference between a kit being hard to build because it's poorly designed and made, and because it's just fiddly or has a lot of parts. One is definitely a more enjoyable difficulty than the other. I wouldn't recommend this kit to a beginner, but I wouldn't say that it's an advanced kit either. I'm sure if you've got a couple of kits under your belt, you'd be able to deal with anything this one can throw at you. I'm not an expert on FT-17s or anything really, but I think this is a pretty well detailed and accurate kit. I'm certainly not a rivet counter by any means, but it looks pretty convincingly like the real thing to me, and I'm very happy with it. I had a good time putting this kit together. There were some things that were moderately annoying, but nothing too serious. It's the sort of kit that will take you a fair chunk of time to build, especially if you're going to paint the interior, but that's not a bad thing. It's not a gaming piece, so you're probably not going to be in a rush to get it built for a game or anything like that, so you might as well take your time and enjoy the hobby. I did a fairly simple job painting the interior, but it still took time. When I requested this kit, I hadn't actually realised it even had an interior. Not that I'm complaining about that, it's pretty cool. Speaking of asking for this kit, it was sent to me by Metro Hobbies, who have generously sponsored this video. Metro Hobbies is a great store, and when I'm looking for something in particular, they're usually my first stop. If you like this FT-17, and you want one for yourself, there's a link in the description you can use to purchase it, and it is an enjoyable kit that I would recommend. There's also a more general link you can use to have a look at all of the kits and everything else that Metro Hobbies has on offer, and there is a lot of cool stuff there, so be sure to check them out. If you've got any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comments section below. If you've built one of these or any other cool models and you want to share, why not drop by our friendly Discord community and show us some pictures? We would love to see what you've done. If you want to watch me build kits like this one live, head on over to my Twitch channel. The link is in the description below. And if you've not already done so, why not subscribe, follow, ring the bell, consider becoming a patron if you'd like to see my videos a bit early, or maybe just come say hi on Discord or Twitch next time I'm live. And if you're feeling really helpful, why not share this video with your friends and enemies and people on the streets and anybody you think might get something out of it. I'm sure your neighbours would love to know about the Meng FT-17. You can find links to all of my things like social media in the description below. And, as always, I shall return soon. So until then, be excellent to each other, have an amazing day, and thanks for watching. Farewell.